I acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of this country and their continuing connection to culture, community, land, sea and sky. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I would like to extend that acknowledgement to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander in the room. I'd like to introduce Jane Yettica, a Minyungbal, Yangumbe, Dunghutti, Vanuatu person living in the lands of the Yidinji peoples in far north Queensland. Jane is the Communications Coordinator at FireSticks Alliance and leads the initiative to embed Indigenous cultural practices and protocols across communications and visual storytelling. Her work advocates for the appropriate recognition and protection of Indigenous knowledges in spaces that are often dominated by Western processes. Her commitment to ensure responsible representation of place and community engagement for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples sets her up as a leader in the field. We are very privileged to have her here today to talk about the principles embedded in her work for her people, country and cultures. She has extensive experience in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community engagement, communications and project management. Her purposeful approach shows that she prioritises meaningful contributions for her communities. She is currently studying a Master of Business Administration at UNSW, specialising in change management and social impact. I'd now like to talk and introduce the FireSticks Alliance. The Indigenous-led FireSticks network was established through the work of Dr Tommy George and Dr George Musgrave with Victor Stephenson. In 2019, this network became incorporated as FireSticks Alliance Indigenous Corporation. FireSticks aims to reinvigorate the use of cultural burning by facilitating cultural learning pathways to fire and land management for communities. It is an initiative for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to look after country, share their experiences and collectively explore ways to ensure the health of country and community. UTS Design has had a continuing collaboration and partnership with this movement since 2002. This partnership between FireSticks Alliance and UTS Design is led by Dr Jacqueline Goth and focuses on the revival of Indigenous knowledge in contemporary land management through visual communication design and provides a platform to examine the responsible representation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' culture and place. Of great importance in this research is the recognition of the First Nations custodianship of land and culture in this place where sovereignty has never been ceded, and to develop culturally respectful approaches for visual communication designers on non-Indigenous-led projects. Since the inception of the collaboration, UTS designers, UTS students, production staff and alumni have contributed to the development of the visual language for print and web and video to share the principles and stories about membership, mentorship on country. Collaborators have included Clement Giroux, Vera Hong, Craig Bender, and UTS alumni Mitra Goucher and Lyndell Harris. Lyndell Harris, who I think is here today, of September Design, has worked with FireSticks and Jacqueline Goth since 2008. The most recent work is the work on the Cultural Fire Credits, a collaboration between Aboriginal Carbon Foundation and FireSticks Alliance, and provides support for Indigenous-led land and fire management. September is a small team of highly skilled collaborators that specialise in brand design and art direction for the fashion and lifestyle market. September are very proud of the design system they have created for FireSticks and Jacqueline for FireSticks. The systems have proven to have longevity and impact in contemporary land management. And lastly, I'd like to introduce myself, Sarah Jane Jones, As a design researcher, I look at ways to incorporate storytelling into wayfinding design and the relationship between physical signage and digital wayfinding. Over the last few years, I have worked on a number of interpretive wayfinding and signage design projects, which have all been Indigenous-led. This has been a combination of working with the Indigenous company Jinjama, led by Daniel Homick, a Budawong and Yuin person, in collaboration with Indigenous leadership departments and local governments. These projects are based on a co-design process with local Aboriginal community and Aboriginal key stakeholders. My relationship with FireSticks is that I am currently working on a research project with Associate Professor Jacqueline Goth and Indigenous artist Sarita Felding, a Wanarua person, in visualising the story of healing country through interpretive signage in the Hunter Valley. This is part of the Black Summer Recovery Grant program from the Australian Government. The signage will work in combination with guided experience that will run on each site in seven different locations. And now I'd like to hand over to Jane.
Nani Bilinga, Nani Jenga, Nani Nanajo Bodaga Jargon, Nani Minyabo Yukambe Dangari Mubil. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jane Yettica. I'm a Minyabo Yukambe Dangari person. I'd just like to begin by thanking Anna Runda for the beautiful welcome to country and also pay my respects to the Indigenous people on whose land I'm joining you from today. I'd like to pay respect to my ancestors, elders and cultural knowledge holders for the role that they continue to play to my connection to country, cultures and community, and acknowledge the two old people who shared their fire knowledge, which has enabled FireSticks to continue to share this across the continent now known as Australia. The role of visual storytelling in FireSticks works. There's no doubt that the ongoing impact of colonisation has greatly impacted Aboriginal people's ability to access land, culture, and utilise traditional land management practices. Combined with the introduction of invasive flora and fauna and Western firefighting practices, this has created an excess of what we call sick country, all across this continent now known as Australia. The term sick country represents landscapes that have been mismanaged and are not effectively supporting the ecosystem in the way that they should be. This in itself is extremely concerning, but unfortunately the problem is much bigger than that. Climate change is directly impacting the frequency and intensity of wildfires. With multiple studies backing this up and a multiple decade study published in November of last year, recorded and compared the total forest area burned in Australia between 1988 and 2001 and 2002 and 2019. The results show a 350% increase in the area burned between each study and a massive 800% increase when comparing 2019. Data like this demonstrates the devastating impacts of climate change on landscapes, and this is why FireSticks is so passionate about empowering and mentoring the next generation of fire practitioners. To ensure Australia has a workforce that is equipped with the right knowledge, protocols, and skills to apply the right fire to the right landscape at the right time. Helping to reduce the frequency and intensities of wildfires, healing and protecting and caring for country and community, as it has been on this land for thousands of years. Next slide, please. A crucial component to the work that we do at FireSticks is visual storytelling and the use of images, graphics, and videos to engage our audience across social media, website, print and digital media, and many other platforms. It's a way to showcase the communities that we work with, to record the workshops and networks that we have, and a mechanism to support the continuation of culture. There's a lot of misunderstandings in the wider Australian community about what cultural burning is and why it's important. There's also a lot of fear of fire. Visual storytelling is a way to communicate, demonstrate, and provide evidence of the environmental, cultural, social, and economic impacts of traditional land management practices. Additionally, there are many complexities within the practice, and visual storytelling is a way to effectively break down elements of this ancient practice to help people expand their understanding of kinship and law aspects as it relates to cultural fire. Next slide, please.
why we stand here today, it's where we've had our two fires come and meet. We've got good fire meet bad fire. So it's been a meeting place, and from these meeting places we have knowledge and we learn. Fire is medicine to country. We apply fire as medicine to create this healthy landscape. So when we burnt this 18 months ago, there was me being the old fella and 3 young leaders in our community walking through here for 13 nights, learning as the fire moved through the landscape, reading country through the indicators, and learning from the expression that the fire was giving us. This fire here had no one working with it. It had people fighting it, which is the wrong metaphor with fire. We need people not fighting fire, but walking with fire. And through walking through fire, we can create a healthy landscape. We've connected our grasses across the landscape, and these grasses provided passage for this fire to follow. And just like the rain, the fire would follow its own path through the landscape. So it harnesses the important relationships between soil, landscape, people, plants and animals. And it's that holistic relationship that creates a connection to country.
Thank you. I chose that video because it shows some of the work that we've done at FireSticks with some of the partners and supporters that Sarah Jane mentioned earlier. And it's a good indication of the reciprocal and interrelated relationships that we often talk about when we're talking about cultural fire. This here is what we call the knowledge triangle. And it's actually a framework which embeds knowledge. So it breaks down all of those elements that are reciprocal and interrelated within cultural burning, but it's actually got multiple uses, endless uses really. It can be used and applied across any aspect of life. So the knowledge triangle has been developed by FireSticks lead practitioner Victor Stephenson under the guidance of his elders. Each side represents a key component that can guide. So knowing who we are, knowing what to do, knowing what it is. Also knowing what to do, knowing how to do it, and knowing what it is. So we use this at FireSticks from our on-country assessments to developing our new initiatives from cultural fire credits. We use this triangle as a guiding principle for absolutely everything that we do. This triangle is used extensively in our mentoring program for the next generation of fire practitioners. They must know country through the use of the knowledge triangle and understand each knowledge component and element and how it is linked to different country types that they use. They use this along with scientific data to support the process of deeply understanding the transition of sick to healthy country within each landscape that they visit. Within our mentoring program, there are about 14 different country types that our fire practitioners visit, and so they must understand that country type and all of the elements within that and how that fits in with the knowledge triangle. To give a practical example of how the knowledge triangle works, knowing what it is might apply to specifically identifying a plant. Knowing what it does might be knowing that the leaves of that plant are good for a sore stomach. And knowing how to do it might mean understanding how to prepare that leaf and that medicine the right way. Coming to know and understand fire and its relationship with country and people requires guidance by elders and knowledge holders through various stages of cultural learning on country. Learning through written or even visual mediums without that learning process on country means that components of place-based knowledge can be misunderstood or lost. Next slide, please. The protection of Indigenous knowledges and captioning of images to affirm place-based knowledge. Protecting this knowledge is imperative to ensuring the cultural practices remain the property of Aboriginal peoples and not appropriated, stolen, or manipulated by those outside of the community. At FireSticks, we've developed a number of protocols which we implement across our work to ensure the protection of intellectual property and cultural intellectual property. These include a number of agreements that has been specifically designed to legally protect IP and ICP, and our communications protocols and practices. We don't work with anyone, including media outlets, unless they sign onto these agreements. A key element of the media agreement is embedding a process for writer review before any publication, which is actually quite interesting in the media landscape because traditionally it's not something that is done. But in order to protect the IP and also the general safety of the public, when we're talking about cultural fire, when we're talking about implementing fire into country, it is very important that we have writer review and that we ensure that communities are represented accurately. Next slide, please. So you may have noticed the captions in each of the images of my slides. This process is part of our communications protocols, which are grounded in Aboriginal cultural protocols of appropriately and accurately identifying people and place. Additionally, our communication protocols outline how to respectfully work with Aboriginal communities and include following Aboriginal cultural protocols as directed by the local traditional owners and local Aboriginal communities, empowering communities by leading from behind, ensuring that our messaging always centres country, culture, truth-telling and healing, and we always engage in deep listening and two-way feedback with our audiences. Engaging in two-way feedback is particularly important when working with Aboriginal communities, as reciprocal relationships are a significant component of our kinship and culture. This means always taking on board both verbal and non-verbal feedback from community, respecting boundaries and understanding that knowledge, stories, places, and people are not available to everybody. Next slide, please. We use an app called Fulcrum when we're on country facilitating workshops and delivering our mentoring program with Mob. This app has a number of incredible features that allow us to record data, images, and videos about what's happening on country. Fire practitioners set up what we call monitoring plots, which is a 4-metre square site that is used to monitor and record changes in the landscape pre- and post-implementation of traditional land management practices. Practitioners can spend hours at this site recording all of the flora and fauna, making note of natives, and invasive plants, animal scats, burrows, insects, soil type, and soil health. Some of the plots are in place for several years and are revisited multiple times a year to record and track changes. This data is significant in tracking how climate change is impacting the cultural burning season and the effects of right fire versus wrong fire. We also use this app to track the social and emotional well-being of participants, which forms an important part of the story of how climate crisis is impacting Aboriginal peoples, their connection to country, and their cultural knowledge. Next slide, please. I hope this presentation has provided some insight into the work that we do at FireSticks and the importance of implementing Indigenous processes and protocols in conversations about climate change. Thank you.
Hey Jane, thanks, it was wonderful. I'll just have a bit of a chat. It looks like we've got 5 minutes. Great. I just wanted to back up a bit to the knowledge triangle, and I don't know if we have an image there, but also to the poster that was developed from the knowledge triangle, which was developed by Lyndall Harris and Jacqueline Goth with the guidance of Victor Stephenson and Peter Stanley. But I wondered if we could have a little bit more of a chat about how that's kind of used in practice. Because when I was in the Hunter Valley Inception meeting for the workshop to generate storytelling for the Black Summer Recovery Project, Jacqueline and I pinned these great big posters up on 2 sides of the room, and they were the knowledge triangle and the principles embedded in that were then referred to and used in the session to generate storytelling and the story of the revitalisation of fire on each site by the fire practitioners. Just wondered if you had any more scenarios where they to talk about that in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. If we click through 2 more slides forward, we'll have the poster.
And this poster won the 2014 International Information Design Award, the Editor's Choice Award.
Yeah, look, it might be a little bit too small for people to see all of the information that's on this poster, but it is a really great example of how the knowledge triangle actually applies to cultural fire practices. So the knowledge triangle is a framework that embeds lessons, knowledge, and stories. It's basically a way of, the way I look at it, it's a way of visually demonstrating a practice that is ancient and sacred within Aboriginal culture. You know, our culture is a verbal culture. We didn't ever write these things down, but as we, you know, have changed with, you know, colonization and stuff, having this triangle gives that visual element to it, to understanding all of the different sides of the triangle. And, you know, if you're missing one part of the triangle, you're missing a key component of the knowledge or of the story. For example, going back to the plant example, if you don't understand how to do it, you could prepare that plant wrong, and you could potentially be putting yourself in harm or other people's in harm by, you know, mispreparing the medicine and giving that out to people. So it's really important that you always have each side of the triangle and you understand all of that in order to implement, in this case, cultural fire. So this is how we use this within our mentoring program to build that recognition within our associate fire practitioners. They can't go out and be implementing, you know, cultural fire on country until they understand all of the elements of the triangle, knowing what it is, knowing how to do it, and knowing what it does. So it really kind of provides that practical example. But for us, as I said before, it's got multiple uses, really endless uses. You know, we use it a lot with our mentoring program. We use it a lot when we're on country doing assessments, but it also represents the approach that we have at FireSticks. One of the sides being respect, knowing what it is, you know, respect for local knowledge, for law and traditions, respect for country, and learning by observation and sharing. The other side is responsibility, knowing what it does, you know, ensuring the right people are involved in the planning and implementation of fire based on their cultural connections to that land, teaching young people and passing down that knowledge. And the third element is recognition, knowing how to do it. So embedding cultural connection within contemporary natural resource management, and embedding good training, strong partnerships, on-ground practices, and the appropriate techniques. So again, you can see how this triangle really can be applied across multiple different uses, and really zooming in on this poster and understanding each of those little circles and what they represent, and the reciprocal relationship between each element. It's not just about the fire, because when you're putting fire in country, you need to be thinking about the canopy, you need to be thinking about the weather, you need to be thinking about the animals, you need to be thinking about what cultural law is in that place, are you allowed to be in that place? So there are so many elements to consider when we're talking about cultural fire, and this triangle gives us that framework to really understand those reciprocal relationships that are a key part of our culture.
Thanks, Jane. And moving on, I think it's the next slide. One more question. Can we have a little chat about the cultural fire credits and the meaning embedded in this identity?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Cultural Fire Credits is a new initiative launched by FireSticks Alliance and the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation. It's a credit to support Aboriginal communities to get out on country and implement fire the way that they deem is appropriate for their country. So it really is about self-determination and giving the power back to traditional owners and local mobs to get out there and heal and protect and care for their country in the way that they know best. It's a really exciting initiative, and of course, as you mentioned, we've been working really closely with Lyndall and September Design on this, and this is our, our visual brand mark that we've come up with, and we're really, really excited about it because it has multiple meanings yet again. So, the first ones are representing the both organisations, FireSticks Alliance and the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation. You've got the fire sticks around the outside in the circle, which, are a nod to our logo. And in the middle, you've got a leaf, which is representative of the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation logo. There's also a deeper meaning to this. So with the circles in the middle and the text on the side, as you can see, each of those circles represents a different principle that is essential to effective cultural burning practices. You've got culture, country, community, Indigenous-led, protocols, mentorship, knowledge, and governance. And you can't do cultural fire practices without having all of these principles in place. And so these were the guiding principles that we used when developing the philosophy of the cultural fire credit, But then we've been using these at FireSticks for decades to guide our practice and our approach to cultural fire and sharing that knowledge across the country. But if you look really closely, you'll see culture and governance are on the same circle, because you can't have one without the other. Country and knowledge are on the same level, on the same circle as well. And as you can see, you move through, they're all intertwined and interlinked. So it goes back to that essence of the triangle, is that you can't have one side without the other. And it's all about reciprocal relationship, which is essentially what our culture is. It's that two-way feedback. It's that reciprocal kinship system that we have within our communities, with our land, with our law.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Jane.
Thank you so much.